you so much, Anne and Ella. Basically, I will just give a very short response, or maybe around 15 minutes. I wasn't really planning to do it, but I was so enchanted by the expectation of what Ella would say about the death of enlightenment. I couldn't resist. So what is my response? It's actually a short suggestion I gave to Google. Why Google? You know, as an artist, you usually always get the same question. Oh, you know, you're doing this reflection, but it doesn't change anything, and you have no, whatever you do has no consequences whatsoever, and actually everything is useless. So Google asked me, what kind of AI should we develop? And I said, okay, I'm going to tell you. This text was never published, I have to say, but I was also at that point very surprised by the fact that also among engineers there is this very, very strong almost desire for a post-enlightenment in the sense of having this strong affinity to magic and to religious rituals. I found this very interesting. I took it into account. And they asked me, okay, what should we do as a company? And I told them the answer is really, really simple. You need to build a very intelligent device. And it should be able to answer all possible questions, of course. But I only wanted to answer one single question, which actually is the most useless question anyone could imagine. And the question is the question which has been ridiculed throughout the Middle Ages. It is the question, how many angels can dance on the tip of a needle? And please build a device that can answer the question, how many AIs can dance on the tip of a needle? Because this is the most useless question one can imagine. And if your device manages to answer it, then it will be a great device. So, and actually there has been one person that has already been capable of answering this question in a paper which is called Quantum Gravity Treatment of the Angel Density Problem. This guy is called Anders Sandberg. He works in Sweden at the Royal Institute of Technology, and he proved very convincingly that the maximum number of angels to be able to dance on the tip of a needle is 8.6766 times 10 to the power of 49. This is the maximum number of angels you can put on the tip of a needle, and also there are certain limitations. They need to dance at a certain speed, otherwise the needle pin will collapse into a black hole. Okay, so I said, please build this thing. I know it's going to take you a while. In the meantime, I'm just going to build this thing as a story because this is much cheaper, and I will develop it as I speak. But, you know, my fictional AI is calculating the answer, and in the meantime, I will ask another question, which is much easier to answer, namely the question, let's look at these angels, right? We know from medieval art history that angels have a very interesting property. They don't have a shadow for some reason. So if you paint them, they are not going to have a shadow. However, I now claim that AIs have shadows. And more than that, even though we don't know what they are, because we heard that several times today, AI is a kind of story, right? It's a kind of fiction. No one really knows what we mean by AI. Even though we don't know what it is or whether it even exists, I claim that these things have real existing shadows, in contrast to angels. So what do I mean by that? And actually this idea came to me because I have been working with 3D image generation a lot. And if you model in 3D, then it's very easy to basically construct an object, but then you just switch a box and you only have the shadow of the object. The object itself disappears, so you only see the shadow of the object. And I would argue that this fictional AI functions in the same way. The shadow is visible everywhere, yet the object is invisible. And my example that I also gave Google was the example of this company. What is the shadow? What is the shadow of the AI? The company which is portrayed in the work upstairs called Broken Windows. It is the example of this company in the UK I interviewed. They have this kind of company that builds home security appliances, and they were breaking windows for weeks on end in a big airplane hangar to teach their neural network the sound of breaking windows, obviously in order to embed it into their device so the device could call the police if someone was breaking into their home. And they wanted, of course, to map every possible sound in the world and make a taxonomy of all the sounds in the world that an AI could recognize and so on and so on. But then I thought about, okay, let's think about the world that will be created through the implementation of such device, and let's say it will be deployed in an area where there's a lot of burglaries, right? Let's say, for example, this is in the Bay Area around San Francisco, where recently there have been a lot of newly rich people through the tech industry and also newly homeless people because of the tech industry. And so this device would find a great market there because you can anticipate that there will be more burglaries. And then you could also say that everyone is happy because it's a win-win situation. And basically tech creates problems which have to be solved through more tech and so on and so on. But on the other hand, if you just keep pushing this, then you will end up with a kind of world where there is, on the one hand, ever bigger markets for disruptive products, but on the other hand, there's also bigger and wealthier homes and more targets for burglars. Ella was mentioning the oligarch problem extensively. But also in this world, you may not be able to call any police because the police doesn't come anymore because there's no more taxes to pay the police. The army has the same problem, so you have to employ a private militia to solve your security problem. And if you solve the private militia, then the private militia will, discover after a while that it's much more profitable to actually own the real estate industry, because then it's not only about, guarding the house, but maybe even breaking the window of the house or building a new house after destroying the whole house. This is a much more profitable industry. So if you keep, pushing the problem, exacerbating the problem, you end up with a world which actually I have seen, in places like Syria and also Eastern Turkey, where these situations really exist. A totally securitized world that's assisted by AI suddenly looks like a war zone. So in that sense, this is probably one of the versions of the world that could be created using these kind of security devices. And at this point, I have to stop myself and immediately go back to my fictional device, which is still calculating in the background, which is still calculating the number of the AIs which are dancing on the tip of a needle. So how is this problem doing? And one has to admit that the problem is not as stupid as I initially told you. The problem of the angels on the tip of the needle was a very important problem in scholasticist philosophy, and the answer was also much more rational than one would expect, because people were thinking about angels as pure intelligences and using the opportunity to think about space and time and extension. And it was basically a sort of mental exercise for people to learn how to use words like where and when, instead of just using them in a fuzzy and blurry way. And also there's something really interesting if you look at scholasticist angel philosophy, then it turns out that angels actually have social systems, right? They are not just anarchist bunches and packs, they come in military formation usually. You know, they have a real rank and hierarchy system. They have a whole class society, so to speak. They are arranged in dominions, lordships, and so on. So the angelic constellations organize time and space within a class society, and this also goes for demons, which are sort of the anti-angels, if you like, which also have a lot to do with computation, actually. There was this strand of, well, magic / a little philosophy maybe, in the Jewish Kabbalah, which provided algorithms to compute the number of demons, the names of demons using numbers. So you could basically compute demons out of some kind of numeric magic. So what I'm trying to say is basically, if you think of this angel problem, angel on the tip of a needle, then you see that actually what's happening there, if you really manage to attract either AIs or angels or whatever, is you get a sort of microcosmos. You get a simulation of a whole universe which is complete with notions of intelligence, time, space, social hierarchies, and all the algorithms to basically calculate all of these. And coming back to the shadow, right? The shadow which angels do not have, but which these tiny AIs might have that are dancing on the top of the needle. I think that actually those shadows can also be described in the form of little demons, because I wouldn't know how to otherwise call the number of entities that live in my smartphone and are up for no good all day long. I think that basically all these entities, which I have called artificial stupidities elsewhere, which are maybe, low-tech chatbots, but also just simple vending machines or production machines, that these could be easily described using, the cosmology of demons that was developed in the medieval times. For example, there was this beautiful story of thousands of demons inhabiting even the crumbs of bread falling down from a table. And I think if you look at your smartphone now, then you can see all these crumbs in the form of little applications in there that have taken over your phone. And of course, this also has a lot of real social implications, because these types of little critters or entities are basically the real existing version of what Ella calls the God in a box, or the megafauna, or the shining AI, which is either super potent or also malicious sometimes. But the fact is, this doesn't really exist, but the thing that really exists are all these little entities that just wreck your everyday life through automation, through a lot of bureaucracy, automated bureaucracy that goes wrong, through digital unemployment, and so on and so on. So basically, all these devices are already restructuring society. They are already, changing the world we live on, and thus, of course, also contribute, and I guess almost everyone said this all day long, to a more unequal and potentially also more reactionary and divided and fragmented and so on world. So now, finally, I have the number of AIs which are able to dance on the needle tip. And if I ask my hypothetical device, it will answer me, yes, of course, I know the number. The number is 8.6766 times 10 by the power of 49, but this is not really the problem. The problem is I don't know how to dance. So this AI, as I told you, is really, really super intelligent. It has immediately recognized the problem. What is the choreography that will enable all these entities to somehow coexist in a sort of at least halfway coordinated way. Is there anything we can think of that would enable a social choreography which would allow for people not only to survive but also, have a kind of dignity in life? And I said this is basically the main problem. One of the problems is that, people expect artificial intelligence to solve everything, right? I mean, all the problems you cannot solve, all the questions which cannot be answered somehow are supposed to be solved through these magical, mythical, hypothetical, and fully fictional devices. But what really happens is even if you build them in a sort of thought experiment, you realize that there is always one question which it cannot answer, and then you need another AI to solve the problem of the first one, and which will create another problem, and then you have this sort of infinite regress of hypothetical AIs which actually produce the same thing that also happens if I go to a Berlin administration. It's people pushing their problems onto the desk of someone else. So basically, this is the reality of it. And the problem is that, the most intractable problems are not problems that automation can solve, right? You only have to look at Germany, which is an engineering country. They solved a lot of engineering questions, but if there's two people who are fighting over the location of their garden fence, then it's absolutely intractable, It's absolutely unsolvable. With engineering means or any sort of means, it's easier to send people to Mars than to solve this problem. So this problem cannot be automated, by no means, right? And the idea to have any kind of device to automate basically social interaction will just create more and more problems. So basically, and now I will cut because now there's a bunch of things which I suggested them they could do, but to generalize this, I think thinking about the choreography, the social choreography, is one of the main things. The second is, of course, going back to the idea of the shadow of AI, even though AI doesn't yet exist or may never exist. How do you then basically reverse engineer the missing object from its shadow? Because if you start fixing all the problems that exist today already because of this kind of dysfunctional, stupid, uncoordinated AI, if you start fixing the shadow, then obviously, once the object becomes visible, it will have changed as well. So basically, you engineer the object from changing its social shadow, and I think this is one of the first steps one could take. There's also others, and maybe we can leave them for the discussion, because, I used to be really open source maniac. I thought everything should always be transparent and public, but in the last couple weeks, months, I really reconsidered, I will just throw this out for the debate, maybe it's a much better idea if anyone finds out anything more about neural networks or machine learning, just not to say anything about it for the next 500 years. I think, the idea is actually came to me by way of Leonardo da Vinci, because he invented a submarine in 1515, and he didn't tell anyone about it. He put it somewhere in his notebook, and the page bleached, so it cannot be read. And he put a note somewhere, not next to the boat, but somewhere, that because humans are evil and will just use it to kill one another, he won't tell anyone. And in fact, he managed to delay the introduction of submarines by about 400 years. So maybe this is something one could think of, in relation to of machine learning. And the other thing which I will also throw out, I discussed this with Ella, she wasn't really convinced yesterday, is to state that, okay, AI or neural networks are cute, they do some kind of interesting things, maybe we should just keep them inside the gallery, right? And use the gallery as some kind of prison only use it for art, for nothing else, like a sort of laboratory. I had this idea actually in relation to financial algorithm. I thought, yeah, I mean, mathematics is very interesting. You can basically simulate all the effects in the gallery first and then implement them in reality. The implementation in the world is also something that Ella talked about. Also maybe for the next 500 years. Until basically all the consequences become more known, or at least some of them, and then, open the next chapter. So, thank you.